church at Corinth had been gifted with the power of the Holy Spirit in miraculous ways. They had gifts that they were experiencing and that they were expressing in their worship services that helped their church family. It encouraged their church body, or at least that was the purpose. That was the purpose of these gifts. But also, these were so powerful, so amazing, that they were a witness to unbelievers who would come in among them and see things that no ordinary people could do. These things were supernatural. And so the purpose of these gifts was to draw people to Christ, to draw the body of the church family together, to unite them, strengthen them, and to draw people outside of the body to Christ. Well, that wasn't happening because people were getting very distracted by the spectacular nature of these things, and there was jealousy. They were saying, wow, you got a gift better than my gift. I wish I was you. I wish I had that. Where other people would get rather full of themselves and say, yeah, don't you wish you were me? I'm all that, and you're not. And so there was division, splits taking place in the church. We've talked about some other reasons that they weren't united, but this was one of the reasons too. And so Paul, in the middle of this discussion of how you conduct yourself in a worship service, he brings perspective to an understanding of how the Holy Spirit gives us the abilities that he does and the purpose of these things. And he says that if you're going to go for a gift, if you're going to desire a gift from God, don't settle for anything less than the best, because there is one gift that comes to us, that comes through the Holy Spirit, that is supreme. It rises above any other. It is the best, the highest. It's the greatest motivation for anything that we do, and it's available to each and every follower of Christ. That's the one that we should strive for. And what is that? Well, it's love. A crazy little thing called love. Now, believe it or not, Paul did not write the 13th chapter of Corinthians so that we would have something to read at wedding ceremonies, although it is a very nice thing to read in that situation. He said what he said, wrote what he did in order to bring together a church that was coming apart at the seams, to unite them once again. And he said the way that happens is when we manifest love. He says, it is possible to look good but not be good. It all has to do with motives. You can be eloquent, you can be charismatic, you can be miraculously charismatic. You can be brilliant in your knowledge and your wisdom, fearless in faith. You can memorize the Bible and pray every day. You can listen to Christian radio, read Christian books, go to Christian movies, have Christian friends, baptize hundreds of people, be a champion to the poor, and even be willing to give your body up as a martyr. And if the motive isn't right, all you have become is a very busy, noisy, misdirected person. Because you missed the point. You've missed the deepest motivation. Jesus said the same thing. He said, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, is going to enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name? And in your name we cast out demons, and in your name we performed many mighty miracles. And I'm going to say to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. So what is it in the midst of all those wonderful things that somebody would do? What would be missing from that equation that would exclude somebody from the presence of God? And it's love. It's a failure to understand what the biggest and the best commandment is. It's not following the 10 commandments. It's following the commandment. The one that Jesus said sums up everything, and that is to love God with everything you've got and love people with everything you've got. Love your neighbor as yourself. That is what gives birth to everything that we do as followers of Jesus. Love is a noun. It's a reality. You can't hold love in your hand. You can't pour it into a beaker. But we know it's real, don't we? It's a thing. It's out there. It's a noun. It's also an adverb. It describes things. The love train. Get on board the love train if you're an OJ's fan. The early Christians had what they called a love feast. They would come together for a common meal, and at the end of their common meal, they would celebrate communion or the Lord's Supper together. A love feast. But most commonly, love, as it occurs in the New Testament, and it occurs 143 times as a verb, love is action. Love is something that you do. Now, the Greek language, the New Testament was written, for the most part, in the Greek language, which was Koine Greek, common language of the day. It's a very rich language, very descriptive, and they had different words for love, the different nuances of love. One word was eros. That sounds familiar. It's where we get our word erotic. That speaks of a sexual love, a sexual attraction between a man and a woman. Eros was the Greek god of sexuality. Cupid was the Roman alternative to that. Now, God is all about the love between a man and a woman and the attraction that we feel for each other as husband and wife, even physically. It's all about that. It was God's idea in the first place. That word, though, doesn't occur in the New Testament anywhere, which is kind of funny. Maybe they didn't want to use that was a name that was the name of a Greek god. I don't know, but it's not in there, eros. Storge is another Greek word for love. That's family love, the love that parents have for their kids and brothers and sisters have for each other. Very good, very lofty. God certainly affirms that. It's not found anywhere in the New Testament. For whatever reason, storge isn't in there. The next one is phileo. Phileo is love between best buddies, best friends. You've had a best friend as a kid, and you maybe remember the intensity of how committed you were to each other. You know, nobody can push around your best friend or they're going to have to deal with you. That word is used to describe the friendship or the love that Jesus had for the Apostle John. You know, when John refers to himself in his gospel and says the one that Jesus loved best and most, that's the form of love that he uses, phileo. It describes the love that Jesus had for Lazarus as he stood there and cried beside his tomb when Lazarus had died. Evidently, they were best friends, and that was the love they shared. But in the English language, love, when we throw that word out there, it can mean a lot of different things according to the context. One time there was a little girl who was invited to come and have dinner with her friend, and so as they were getting ready, on the menu that night was buttered broccoli. And so the mom asked the little girl who was the guest, she said, do you like buttered broccoli? She said, oh, yes, ma'am, I love it. And so they sat down at the table, and they were passing food around, and the bowl of broccoli came to the little girl, and she didn't take any. And the mom asked her, she said, I thought you said you loved broccoli. And she says, oh, yes, ma'am, I do, just not enough to eat it. Yeah, I love a lot of things. I love God. I love God desperately. I love my wife. I love my wife desperately. I love my kids, and I love my grandkids. I love Grater's ice cream and Dewey's pizza and Notre Dame football. There's no booing in church. Come on. But all of those kinds of love have a lot different emotions attached to them and a lot of different outcomes. Well, what's that fourth Greek word? That fourth Greek word is agape. In English, it looks like agape. It's agape. But if you express and live out agape love in your life, you may leave people with their mouths agape because it's amazing. It's a word that doesn't occur that often in classical Greek writings outside of the New Testament. Isn't mentioned that much. But it's by far the word that's used most often in the New Testament for love. And it was really redefined by Jesus. He's the one who made agape love famous as he lived it out. And anytime Jesus spoke of love, that's the word that he used. Almost always, agape. And this is a love that means that you are always acting in the best interest of your fellow human beings, no matter what. Selfless concern for others. Living and loving to serve and not be served. And so that's Jesus, right? That's the epitome of who Jesus was and who Jesus is. If they had a definition of agape in the first century in the dictionary, his picture should have been right next to it because he's the one that fleshed that out entirely for us. It's a motivation that comes out of, it doesn't come out of emotion. It doesn't come out of the fact that I like you a lot. It isn't a passionate kind of love. It's a love that's motivated by responsibility. I ought to do the best for you because, as a follower of Christ, that's what I do. That's what we do. It's all about you. It's all about others and not about me. It's all about God and not about me. That's agape, which is really good news for us because maybe you face the dilemma sometimes where you're doing things you know you should do as a Christian, especially for the sake of somebody else. You're serving somebody, meeting a need in some way, but you think, I don't like this. I hate this. This is awful. And you may even go so far as to say, I don't even like this person. And yet here I am. So should I even be doing this? Does this cancel out what I'm doing for the sake of Christ? Actually, that is good news because that is what agape love will drive you to do. Because when we meet the need of somebody else, agape love says you don't do it because of how it makes you feel. Because I feel gratified. I feel better about myself. I have all these warm, bubbly things going on inside when I do this. No, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with I'm doing the right thing for a person in need, and my emotions or my feelings about it are way down the line. It's not about my gratification. It's about human need, and I'm going to meet that need because that is what Christ calls me to do. You are right in the center of agape love, regardless of what your emotions are. It's not driven by emotion. It's driven by an understanding of who we are and what we do according to the example of Christ. And so Paul goes on and he describes love. And he doesn't just give flowery definitions of love. He attaches love to 16 verbs here. And we'll move through these fairly rapidly here this morning. But he's saying it's not so much this is what love is, this is what love does. We're going to flesh this out practically. This is what love looks like in action. Love demonstrates patience. Love is patient. Love is literally, it's long-tempered. Love takes a long time to get ticked off. Love patiently waits and attempts to win over an adversary. That is tricky to do, isn't it? Especially if you're on the phone with a consumer service representative from some entity that you're trying to get some help from. You never know who's going to be on the other end of that line and what their attitude's going to be. I called not too long ago for a business here in town, and I needed some help, and I must have been first call of the day. So the lady, she answered the phone, and she said, yeah, what do you want? And this better be important. No, she didn't say that, but her tone was all over that. That is exactly what she was saying to me. And so my immediate initial response could have been to come right back at her, but I didn't do it. I thought, okay, no, this is going to be a good day. I'm going to be Jesus today. And I didn't do this in a sarcastic way, but I was the most pleasant person I think she's ever had on the phone. And the amazing thing was, she flipped in just a matter of moments. When she found out that I wasn't some crank and I wasn't a grump, that I was going to be reasonable, the conversation turned around. And by the end of the conversation, it was her pleasure to take care of my problem. And practically that just works out. You come at somebody with a lot of surliness, you're going to get put on hold while they drink a cup of coffee, and they might or might not get back to you. Yeah, love is patient. Love is kind. Kindness, that's the acting out of patience. Literally, it means usefulness. Love is something that does things useful for other people. Jesus said, if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? Sinners do that. Heathens, anybody's capable of doing that. No, but as my followers, here's what's different about you and me. We even are kind toward our enemies. You do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. And when you do, your reward will be great, and you will be considered sons and daughters of the Most High. Because, here's the motivation, because He Himself, God Himself, is kind to ungrateful and evil men just like me. God is so kind to me. He does so many good things for me that I don't deserve. And we are called to do that in turn for others, and especially for those who are not going to reciprocate. We do it to everybody, especially we do it within the context of our family here, looking for opportunities to be kind to one another, to be useful to each other when we see a need. Do that within our families as well. Love is not jealous. We know what jealousy is. You have what I want. You receive some kind of recognition that I should have received. I want to be you. You look better than me, and that makes me mad. I want to look better than you. And on it goes. Jealousy. You know, it was jealousy and envy that was one of the motivations of the ones who nailed Jesus on a cross, or who were responsible for nailing him on a cross. It was the leaders of that day who just couldn't take it, that Jesus was so popular and had such a large following, said, we got to take him out. Yeah, jealousy is what motivated that. And so the flip side of that, the loving alternative to that, is when something good happens to you, when there's a blessing that comes into your life, when you're recognized for something and you're applauded, I'm right in there applauding with you and celebrating with you and throwing a little party, because we're family. And what happens to you happens to me. It's all good. I like to visualize it like the guy that hits the walk-off home run in a baseball game. Now, we haven't seen a lot of that lately in Cincinnati, but it happens with other teams. And I love it when the guy hits it out, and he's coming down third baseline, and there's this big gang of guys just waiting there at home plate, and he's coming down, and he comes, and he jumps on home plate, and what happens? Everybody piles on him, and it's a funny way to do it, but they start beating on him, and they pour stuff on him, and they throw him on the ground, and they all jump on him. And that's a good thing, because everybody is celebrating this good thing that this guy just did, because it benefited the whole team. That's how we should function within our families. It happened to you. It happened to all of us. Standing ovation. Good for you. We're going to launch balloons and throw a party. And in the church, in the same way, within our church family, no place for jealousy or envy. It's all good, whatever good thing happens to all of us. Love does not brag. Love is not arrogant. These two ugly twins are related. They both come from self-centeredness. They come from a desire to keep the attention and the focus on me. You know, there's nothing worse than having to spend extended time with somebody whose greatest pleasure is to talk about themselves, on and on and on. And so, yeah, we're the opposite of that. And a good little exercise that we can try is when we're talking to someone, see how long you can keep the attention on them rather than it coming back to you. Okay, you said something about you. Now I say something about me. Now, you know how that goes, kind of like back and forth. See how long you can keep them talking about them, unless it's one of those people that never take a breath about themselves. Then there's a whole different strategy with that. But love is not brag. It doesn't brag. It isn't arrogant. It doesn't say, hey, me, look at me all the time. No, it's, I'm interested in you. Love does not act unbecomingly. Literally, this means without form. Kind of like, you have no form. You have no class. You are a rude person if you are a person who acts unbecomingly. Again, it involves thinking about me, and I'm just oblivious to you. I'll do what I want to do. I'll say what I want to say, and I'm not reading body language at all. You know, you could be standing on your head with discomfort, and I'm just not even seeing that. No, a person who loves is totally observant as to what's happening with another person, what their needs are, as to what needs can be met, or how what I'm saying or what I'm doing is affecting you. Maybe it's possibly offending you. Maybe it's making you uncomfortable. Maybe this is a subject we need to change, or maybe I need to press in further because you're upset, and maybe I can help you. And certainly I'm not going to be rudely, brutally honest with you. I'm going to use tact when I talk to you. I'm going to try and take care of you and be this polite, courteous, sensitive person. That is the mark of a person who follows Christ. Love does not seek its own. Again, unselfishness. It's asking the question when you come into a place where a decision needs to be made. It's not, how does this affect or serve me? The first question we ask is, how does this affect or serve or help or encourage you? That's what drives me forward. That's what dictates what the final decision needs to be. Love is not easily provoked. Love is not goaded easily into an angry confrontation. You know, there are those people that are just like a grenade with a pin pulled. And you're just walking around so careful because you never know What's going to set them off? It's not very pleasant to be around a person like that, is it? And even within the body, if there's a person who functions that way, we might, in the Spirit of Christ, call them out and say, you know what? That really shouldn't be. That is not a fruit of the Spirit for a person to behave that way. And they might say, well, but it's a good thing because, first of all, that's how I'm wired up. But I just get it all out there, in all honesty. I get it all out there, and it's over with in just a few minutes, this explosion. Well, yeah, that's very true. It's also true of a bomb that goes off, which leaves a lot of collateral damage. And so, to look at this positively, that is not us. We are not people who are so easily wounded, so easily provoked that people have to walk on eggshells around us. We're willing to let things slide. We're willing to give people the benefit of the doubt and say, you know what, they're a good person and they're a good friend. They probably didn't mean that the way it came across. Cutting each other slack, not easily provoked. And along with that, doesn't take into account a wrong suffered. When it says take into account, that's an accounting term. It talks about somebody who's writing down a financial transaction so they don't forget it. As Christians, we don't do that. As Christians, we have a very short memory when it comes to someone who has wronged us. In the same way that God has a very short memory in the ways that we have offended him, and he chooses to forgive us. God, as it says there in Romans 4, God doesn't add to our account. If you look at our spirituality as a bank account, he doesn't add to that all of the guilt and all the consequences of our sin. He doesn't do that. Instead, he puts in these unexpected dividends of the righteousness of Christ, and he credits that to us over and over again. He doesn't keep an account of our wrongs. He forgives our wrongs, and that's what love does within our relationships, within our homes, within our church body. Love does not rejoice in unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth. It bears all things. It believes all things. Now, when it says we don't rejoice in unrighteousness, but we do with the truth, that isn't talking about a body of understanding. Okay, here's 5 facts to know about God, and I will rejoice in that. He's continuing to talk about relationships here, relationships with people. And so, as loving people who love like Christ, we don't rejoice when somebody goes down, when somebody has a failure in their lives. We don't go, oh, good, now I feel better about myself because they're worse than me now, which is too often a common reaction. No, we don't rejoice in that. We don't go out of our way to make sure a lot of other people know about this failure in somebody's life, and not in the life of an enemy either. We do not rejoice in the failure and the fall of our enemy. We never rejoice in unrighteousness, but only in those good things. And when it says we bear all things, right along with that, that can mean one of two things. But one thing bear all things can mean is that we provide a protective covering over something or someone. And I like that definition here. We are to protect each other, look out for each other's reputations. And when those times of hurt and failure do come, we're the ones who aren't standing off and just distancing ourselves from that, but we're doing what we can to protect that person in the midst of that fall and that failure. And we want to believe all things. We want to believe the best things about each other. Maybe a great example to kind of bring this down is a few years back, many years back, I've got 2 friends. I don't see them much anymore at all. But there were 3 of us who were very close, very close. And one of our friends had a real, just a moral failure, scandalous even, was so bad. And as I was talking to this other mutual friend in the course of the conversation, he had not heard about this yet. It was public knowledge. It was really out there. And he had not heard about this. So I said, yeah, that's the case. That's what happened. And he refused to believe it. He said, I don't believe it. I don't care what you say. I don't believe that he's capable of doing that. Well, unfortunately, he was capable of doing that, and he did. But when I went back to this friend who had the failure, I said, when I told him what had happened, here's what he said. And he was so touched and so moved and so emotional that someone was ready to jump to his defense and preferred to believe the best and not the worst about him until he was just forced to accept otherwise. That's what it means to bear all things, to bear each other's burdens, to protect each other, and hopes all things. When we have those times when we're down and we need somebody to be a true friend and somebody to come alongside, we hope for the best. We say, yeah, we're going to survive this. And endures all things too. You're going to survive this. This looks bad. This looks even impossible. But the good news is that God is in the middle of this, and God is the specialist at coming into the lives of impossible people and impossible circumstances and turning them around and bringing it back to where it ought to be again. We hope the best for each other. We're in there in the thick of it, and we endure all things with each other. That's what love does. You can never go wrong by loving somebody. You know, there are times when you're faced in a situation where you can do this and nothing will happen. Maybe there's a circumstance that ought to be spoken into, but if you do nothing, nothing will happen. It'll just kind of go away. But there's a right thing that ought to happen. There's a loving thing that ought to happen, something that ought to be said, something that ought to be done. But if that loving thing is done, there could be a mess. There could be consequences to that. If you do the right and the loving thing, no matter what happens, you have always done the right thing, and love never fails. Good will eventually come out of that because you've loved, and love never fails. Love is never the wrong thing to do. And so Paul says these imperfect gifts, these things that you're so distracted with, you're so enamored with, the things that you're fighting over, even these miraculous things, he said you got to realize that these things are temporary. These are temporary gifts given for temporary reasons, because right now we need help. We have incomplete understanding. We have incomplete knowledge. And so the Holy Spirit comes in and He helps us in our imperfections here on earth. But eventually they're going to pass away, and we're looking forward to that time when the perfect comes. These things are imperfect. Don't get enamored with these things. Look forward to the time when the perfect comes. What is that? What is that perfect? Well, the perfect is Jesus. When the perfect comes is when we stand face to face with Jesus, and all things will come clear. You know, Paul says right now we see in a mirror dimly. There's a lot of things we don't understand, aren't there? We have questions for God. God, why do you do this? Why don't you do that? I'm hurting desperately, and I'm praying. I am praying sweat drops of blood, and it just seems like you're doing nothing. Why? Why is that? Why do you allow this? Why do you allow that? God, what about? We have all these questions, things we don't understand. We see in a mirror dimly. It's like trying to shave in the mirror that's all steamed up. You can kind of see, but you kind of can't see. Well, we can see enough to know what we need to know to proceed in our life with God. But when the perfect comes, he says, now we see in a mirror dimly, but someday we're going to see face to face with the one, the perfect one. And all of those answers are going to come clear. We're going to understand what we need to understand, and there's going to be a lot of things that aren't even going to make any difference to us anymore. We're going to say, you know what? Doesn't even matter anymore, because here we are standing in the presence of the perfect one, and it's all been worth it. But now faith, hope, and love abide, these three. But the greatest of these is love. There was an old legend that said that the Apostle John, just before he died, he would be carried into the assembly, into the worship service, because he was too weak to walk. And at the end of the service, they would always stand him up, and he would have a last word of exhortation for the congregation. And he would always say the same thing. He would always say, little children, love one another. Little children, love one another. Well, finally his disciples asked him, and they said, why do you always say the same thing every Sunday? Every Sunday. And he said, the legend says, because it is the commandment of the Lord, and that alone is sufficient. Little children, love one another. And so that's what Paul is saying to us today. Love one another with the highest form of love, the love that Christ brought to us, that he demonstrated for us, that he lived out for us as he gave himself completely and totally for the sake of us so that we might live. Love one another. Jesus said, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciples, that you have love for one another." This is how we are made known to the world. This is the contrast that is presented to the world as we take this highest form of love, this agape love, and that's how we treat each other, love each other in our homes. This is how we love each other in our church. Even in the midst of disagreements, even in the midst of tension that comes up, we do not allow that to split us or divide us as a family. We will tenaciously still love each other and want the best for each other, even when we disagree. And in the community, in people that we interact with and rub up against with every day, when we are this loving, patient, kind, other person-oriented type person, that's kind of rare to come across people like that. It stands out. And eventually people are going to come and say, what is up with you? You are so different. I am so drawn to you. I like being around you. What is it about you that makes you that way? And that's the opportunity to say, that's the contrast. This says contrast. This is your first time here. You can get one of these little bracelets. It says contrast on it. That's the contrast, the difference that Christ makes in our lives as he teaches us how to love and how to live in the very best way. So here's the challenge. Here's 4 things, 4 takeaways I want us to take on this week. Love somebody in your home and your family this week. And you might say, well, that's easy. I do that every day. Well, do it in an even more intentional way this week. Say it. Take somebody by the shoulders and look them in the eyes and say, do you know how much I love you? I really do. We need to hear that said to each other in our homes. And then do it. Demonstrate it. Look for those useful, kind things that we can do for each other. Put each other first. Wow, what an oasis home will be if we live that way. Love each other in our home. Love somebody within the Parkside family. We've got a lot of needs here this morning. People who need a word of encouragement, they need support. You need prayer. You might need some very practical things. We got a bunch of new babies being born. We got a population explosion here at Parkside. These people need food. They need help. So there's people who are taking care of that. That sounds very generic, I know. Find those people. Do something about that, okay? Go kiss a baby. But we have needs that we need to take care of in practical, useful ways in our church family. Third thing, love somebody who's hard to love, okay? Doesn't matter how you feel. Doesn't matter if you like them. Love somebody who's hard to love. Now, if somebody comes up to you this week and does something nice for you, don't immediately think, oh, so I'm one of those hard people to love, am I? No. No. That's those other people, okay? That's those other people. And then finally, the 4th thing, if you have the opportunity to love somebody and they react and want to know why, give God a chance. Give God a shout out. Give Jesus a shout out and say, you know, I follow Jesus and this is just the kind of stuff he compels me to do. It's a wonderful thing, isn't it?